Napoleon didn't just conquer Europe. He turned it into a revenue stream. Entire kingdoms marched under his shadow. Armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands crossed borders with mechanical precision. Monarchies fell, treaties were signed, maps were redrawn. But behind the battlefield, drama was something colder, more calculated. Napoleon built a war machine that forced Europe to finance its own subjugation. Napoleon's empire was a titan of the 19th century, stretching from the sun-drenched plains of Spain to the frozen reaches of Poland. But how did a bankrupt France build history's most formidable war machine? The secret lay not just in steel, but in gold. The Grand Army was a masterpiece of military logistics, requiring millions of rations, thousands of horses, and endless crates of gunpowder. This massive mobilization was a miracle, considering the financial chaos and hyperinflation Napoleon inherited from the previous regime. The revolution had left France's treasury empty. Dusty account books and hollow vaults were the legacy of decades of royal debt. The scales of power were weighted down by financial ruin, threatening to collapse before the first shot was even fired. In 1799, Napoleon seized control, replacing revolutionary chaos with stern, centralized order and aggressive financial reform. Through the creation of the Bank of France and stable gold currency, he forged the silver bullets that won his battles. In the end, it was this delicate balance of finance and force that allowed one man to reshape the world forever. In the late 18th century, France stood on the brink of total collapse. The 7 Years' War had been incredibly costly, draining the royal treasury. Seeking to weaken their rivals, France's support for the American Revolution added roughly 1.3 billion livres to the crown's mounting liabilities. By 1788, the financial burden became unbearable. Interest payments alone consumed over half of all royal revenues, leaving the state paralyzed. It is a common historical misconception that the monarchy was overthrown because of ideology alone. In reality, it was overthrown because it couldn't pay its bills. Then came the revolution, born of desperation. This era introduced a financial experiment that nearly destroyed the country's social fabric and economy. In 1790, revolutionary leaders issued assignats. These were paper currency notes intended to stabilize the nation, but they were backed by a controversial source. The value of these assignats was tied to confiscated churchlands. By seizing vast estates, the new government hoped to back their new money with physical property. However, this bold monetary gamble would eventually lead to hyperinflation, teaching a harsh lesson about the dangers of unchecked debt and fiscal crisis. At first, it seemed clever. Monetize seized property, inject liquidity, stabilize the economy. Instead, the government printed aggressively. By 1795, over 45 billion livres in assignats had been issued. Inflation spiraled, the currency collapsed. Prices soared, savings evaporated, trust disintegrated. France experienced something approaching hyperinflation. Revolutionary France would have claimed the gold medal for financial improvisation under pressure, briefly before collapse. Napoleon inherited this country in 1799, exhausted by internal terror, economic instability, and war against multiple European coalitions. He understood something essential: you cannot wage permanent war on monetary chaos. His first move was stabilization, not another invasion. In 1800, he established the Bank of France. In 1803, he introduced the franc, metallic, anchored to gold and silver. Tax collection was centralized, administration modernized, corruption reduced. Budgets were often balanced in the early years. Domestic taxation strengthened, revenue became predictable. But Napoleon refused to let French citizens bear the full cost of permanent war. He exported the bill. After each major victory, France imposed indemnities on defeated states. These weren't symbolic gestures. They were massive financial transfers. In 1805, after defeating Austria at Austerlitz, Austria paid 40 million francs in indemnities.
आज वीडियो में मैं आपको बताऊंगा कि एक ऐसा एआई टूल्स चैनल जिसके बारे में आप सुनकर भी परेशान होने वाले हैं, क्योंकि ये एआई टूल एक ऐसा सीक्रेट काम करने वाला है जिससे आप सोचकर भी हैरान रह जाएंगे। जी हाँ दोस्तों, और ये एआई टूल्स चैनल आपके लिए बहुत बेहतरीन है। इससे मज़ीद
In 1807, after humiliating Prussia, the Treaty of Tilsit was signed, signaling a new era of French dominance. The treaty imposed staggering contributions estimated around 120 million francs. French annual military expenditures were 600 to 700 million francs. A single indemnity could finance months of active warfare. Napoleon's model was brutally efficient: conquer territory and then impose heavy indemnity. Station troops at the occupied state's expense, extract their resources, and fund the next campaign. War financed war. Foreign contributions covered a substantial portion of his total military costs. German states supplied troops and funds. Italy financed French garrisons. Holland bore heavy financial burdens. Spain, before rebellion, was drawn into the system. This was structured extraction, not loose looting. Napoleon transformed conquest into cash flow, but the system required expansion. Each victory opened new revenue streams. Empire functioned like leveraged growth. Growth covered liabilities. To fund the vast machinery of his empire, Napoleon did more than just tax. He deployed forced loans, compelling conquered cities and states to extend credit. Conscription fed the army's need for manpower. However, it was the sophisticated financial logistics that fed everything else on the front lines. Feeding and moving hundreds of thousands of troops across a continent required a level of logistics never before seen in human history. The Grand Army was a city on the move, supported by massive supply trains featuring hundreds of horse-drawn wagons filled with grain and ammunition. The scale of consumption was staggering. Every day, the army required enormous quantities of livestock, uniforms, and specialized artillery equipment. Strategic movement was tracked on detailed logistics maps, where red lines illustrated the vital flow of grain and supplies across the European theater. This wasn't the disorganized raiding of the medieval era. This was industrial-scale mobilization, organized even before the full industrial revolution had matured. It was a blueprint for modern warfare, where the strength of the ledger was as important as the strength of the bayonet. To destroy the British economy, Napoleon Bonaparte issued the Berlin Decree, establishing the continental system of massive trade blockades spanning all of Europe. By closing every major port to British goods, the emperor aimed to bankrupt his greatest rival and secure French dominance over the continent. However, the system was far from perfect. Black markets flourished as desperate merchants smuggled crates of forbidden cargo under the cover of darkness. In Russia, Tsar Alexander I grew weary of the economic strain. His decision to reopen trade with Britain set the stage for a monumental confrontation. Enraged by the betrayal, Napoleon gathered the Grande Armée. 600,000 men began a massive, dusty march eastward into the heart of Russia. But as they pushed deeper, victory remained elusive. Supply lines became dangerously thin, stretched across thousands of kilometers of hostile and empty territory. Then the Russian winter arrived. The Grande Armée, starving and ill-equipped, was forced into a desperate retreat through a frozen wasteland. Of the 500,000 who invaded, fewer than 100,000 returned. The catastrophic campaign had broken Napoleon's legend of invincibility forever. History is often written in blood, but it is sustained by balance sheets. At his peak, Napoleon Bonaparte commanded an empire funded by conquest. But behind the grand victories lay a fragile fiscal reality. The emperor's war machine relied on immediate plunder and indemnities to remain solvent. This was the war feeds war system. Every victory brought wagons of gold and art back to Paris, temporarily masking the absence of a stable credit system. For a decade, the strategy seemed infallible. As long as the Grande Armée marched forward, the French treasury stayed full and the empire flourished. But in 1812, the system hit a frozen wall. The Russian campaign didn't just destroy Napoleon's army. It shattered his financial model. Without new conquests to tax, Napoleon's credit vanished. As coalitions pushed back, the flow of gold stopped, exposing the empire's utter fiscal fragility. In contrast, Britain mastered the art of scalable debt. While France relied on loot, the British utilized a sophisticated banking system to fund resistance. The British model was a growing architectural structure, steady and reliable. The French system was a porcelain pillar brilliant to look at, but easily cracked. Ultimately, it wasn't just a military defeat at Waterloo. It was the collapse of a system that could not afford the price of losing. Napoleon's domestic fiscal discipline only worked because external resources absorbed costs. Britain relied on public debt markets. France relied on expansion. Napoleon's system was dynamic but fragile. Britain's was slower but scalable. After his abdication, the Congress of Vienna redrew political boundaries. France was forced to pay 700 million francs in reparations. The empire that once extracted indemnities now paid them. The lesson is clear. Military dominance without financial sustainability is brittle.
को स्क्रिप्ट लॉन्चिंग ईच एवरीथिंग एक क्लिक पर कर देगा। तो देखते हैं कि ये कौन सा एआई टूल है और आप इसको किस तरह काम कर सकते हैं और इससे किस तरह फ़ायदा ले सकते हैं। चलते हैं मोबाइल की स्क्रीन पर। मोबाइल की स्क्रीन से बढ़ने के पहले आप अगर तक मेरा चैनल को सब्सक्राइब नहीं किया तो सब्सक्राइब करो, लाइक करो, फॉलो करो